Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here a little earlier than planned, but still, it's great to be here. Thank you, Cityjs organizers, for kind of putting together this virtual event, and thank you, attendees, for being here. Just one note as we move forward, I won't be able to see your comments in the YouTube feed because that would distract me. So if there's anything, I'm sure Aris will leave a note here in this little conference chat situation we have going on. But hey, I'm really excited to be here with you and talk to you about exactly what Aris mentioned, what we believe is world-class developer experience through evergreen documentation. And at Zata, actually, it's probably better to do a little introduction to myself and to the company I work at. Let me just share my screen quickly, if I can. I don't know if I can, but I hope this works. But here, this is the plan for today. An intro. I'm Tejas. That's pronounced. Actually, it's an Indian conference. I don't need to teach you how to pronounce it. It's great. And I'm at Tejas Kumar _ on Twitter. And I'm the director of developer relations at Zata.io. And really, we're trying to build what we consider the best managed database on the planet, right? And with that comes high quality developer experience. Like, we want developer experience that's better than what is considered standard. We want to go the extra mile and do work that makes developers feel like it's a nice thing to use. And we're starting with docs. So we don't really, our product is still a closed beta, so to speak. We're not publicly launched yet. We're going to shortly. But if you want, you can sign up for a waitlist on Zata.io. But hey, that's not what we're here to talk about today. I'm not here to sell you anything. What we are here to talk about is what we consider world-class developer experience through evergreen documentation. What does that even mean, you might be asking? Well, look, we're about to launch this product, but the problem is, as people start using it, there's nothing really that they can Google. Like, they can't search for, like, how do I do this with Zata? Because the product doesn't exist yet, and documentation for it doesn't exist yet. So we're starting with documentation first. And as we're kind of counting up our costs and seeing, okay, how can we create not just regular documentation, but documentation we're proud of, right? We did a study and we kind of noticed some patterns that tend to happen with documentation for startups at our stage that move really fast. And these are really the problems that we've experienced with documentation at our stage. One, the docs websites can be slow, which can be frustrating. Like, if you're searching for, like, why is this thing not working? And you go to the doc site and you click on a link maybe to API keys or something. What's going to happen is, if the page takes like more than a certain number of milliseconds to load, you're going to table flip. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to be like, oh, come on, man, I don't like this product. I'm going to go use something else. So slow is no, right? This can be frustrating. That was one thing we noticed that we don't want to have. Secondly, we noticed that sometimes docs can get outdated because the engineering happens so fast. Pull requests are merged, you ship to production. Meanwhile, the docs sometimes are left behind. If you've experienced this, you know what I'm talking about. So how can we create docs that are evergreen, that kind of just go with the code, that's almost generated from the code, you might say? So that was something we wanted to solve. And then third, docs are often what I'm calling opaque in impact, meaning you don't really know if they're useful unless you talk to someone, unless you go to a conference and someone tells you, hey, your docs suck. Like, you don't really know what the impact of your docs is. You don't know the parts that are unclear. You don't know maybe if you can help. And sure, some people may open GitHub issues, but a lot of people, I think, will just be like, yeah, there's way too much effort to open this issue, especially because I'm now frustrated and I'm coming to the docs. So they just rather not. And then you just don't know if your docs are effective or not. By the way, I don't know if you can see my screen or if everything's cool with the connection. So if you want, drop a note maybe in the comments, and Aris will let me know if anything's not visible, if the font size needs to be bumped or similar. So these are the three problems we noticed, and these are what we set out to solve. And this is kind of what we have with our docs site. So our solution at Zata is for speed, to deploy our docs from a CDN edge. What does that mean? That means when you request our doc site from your browser is going to do one request. This request is going to get literally just HTML. There's no server work required. There's nothing that's going to like go somewhere and fetch more docs and come back to you. That round trip is avoided. And because it's a text file, it can be compressed, it can be gzipped, it can be whatever, and what you get is really fast. But even serving it from a CDN edge is a huge deal because it's served from a cache on a machine that's really close to you geographically. That essentially means minimum latency. This is really, really important. Thankfully, we have a Vercel that is able to do this for us. We don't really have to worry about deploying our own CDN. So that was pretty much a go-to for us. Second, we want the docs to be automatically generated from source code or from code. And that's really important to us because we know that if we're not careful, docs can go out of date and things can go really bad, right? So how can we do that? We'll look at that in just a minute. Third, we want to know if our docs are having a good impact or an impact at all. So if something's not clear, we want to know, and we want to make it as comfortable and as frictionless as possible. We're talking about world-class developer experience, right? We want to make it as frictionless as possible so that people can give us feedback and ask us to clarify. So these are our three solutions to these three problems. And I'd love to kind of show that to you today. And then we'll talk about some technical details. So if you can still see my browser, this is the doc site. This is docs.zata.io. You're welcome to go have a look if you want to. As mentioned, deployed statically as text files from a CDN edge, has generated from some parts are generated from source code. And of course, there's easy ways to share feedback. Let's walk through these right now. So how is it served from an edge and how can I check how fast this is? Well, I think the best way is to probably do a Lighthouse test in incognito. So if I go here to Lighthouse in my browser and just kind of, let's run a report, right? So this is going to just run all kinds of tests with speed and so on. And it'll give us a score of performance and best practices, all these things. And as we can see, 100 performance, 95 accessibility, 100 best. This is pretty nuts. And we're proud of this. If we look at the best practices of the accessibility, it's just in some places we don't have enough contrast. This is good for us to know. Okay, so we can definitely bump the contrast there, but this is a very impressive score. What this means is our time to first byte or our time to interactive is 0.2 seconds. That's nuts. That means if someone's having an issue, if they want to know more about like API keys, they click here, it's instant. And that is what we believe is a world-class developer experience. So that's one thing. Secondly, what is this code generation business we're talking about? Well, at Zata, the main way you interact with our product from your product is through an API, is through a REST API. And so this API needs to be clear. I can't imagine the pain you'd feel if you're trying to do something with our API and you get some unexpected behavior, usually because maybe you called the wrong endpoint or something. So we have this API reference over here that contains a lot of operations you can do. For example, if you want to get a table's columns, you can see this. This entire page we're looking at here, the content here is 100% generated from source code. This is not markdown. We literally have a giant like 30,000 line YAML document that describes the API that the backend engineers and the front-end engineers use to write code, right? So we ingest that document, process it a bit so it's compatible with the UI, and then render it here. I can maybe show you that as well. This is an internal GitHub repo. So I need to be a bit careful that I don't show you too much, but if we go to public, it's public, right? So this is really the file. It follows the OpenAPI spec. And it's just, I mean, okay, not 30,000 lines. I was wrong. It's 3,000 lines, but it's a lot. We use this on the back end to generate API stuff, we use this on the front end and so on. This also gives us this entire thing. The advantage of this is when somebody changes the API, they change this document, and that then influences the backend development and also influences the front end, and the docs are just magically up to date. We're really, really proud of this. In fact, we even have technology that will give us like like a screenshot of this repo at a certain branch versus the main branch on the doc side. And so it's very, very powerful. So that's how we're able to keep the API reference constantly up to date. We can even do an API preview at a given branch. I won't do that now, but we can because there's some internal stuff I probably shouldn't share. So that's the code gen piece. The third piece, the way we're making this world-class and solving issues with docs that we see commonly, is to measure the impact. So say, for example, we go to API context. What's that about, right? And we go to this page, and maybe you don't understand something, like you don't understand this. What does some things mean? I don't know. So if you click this button, please clarify this. This will actually open an issue on our GitHub repo internally that I monitor, and I'll know, okay, someone doesn't understand this. I can clarify it. I can say more. You can copy a link to this, send it to a friend, and it will highlight exactly that piece for you so they know where to go. So that's convenient. But above and beyond, we really like going the extra mile at Zata. So what we can also do is this little feedback button here. If we click this, we can describe, hey, this page is unclear because blah, blah. In fact, let me highlight some text, right? And I can say now, this page is unclear because blah, blah. And I can choose to include a screenshot. And if I do that, I quickly get asked for permission. I can even share my entire screen if I want to. I can share other windows. I'll just share this tab. We'll take a quick screenshot. And if I send this, this also creates an issue in GitHub on a repo that I monitor with the screenshot, and I can iterate and help you. So we're able to really track the impact our docs are having. So that's 3 ways we're really taking docs seriously. Of course, there's a keyboard shortcut to search, because why not? We have no results for hello, but something like, yeah, there we go. So there's many things there, but I figured for the purposes of this talk, I can highlight one of them. I don't think we'll have time to go through all 3. And ideally, I'd be able to monitor your comments and find out which one you want to go deeper on. Since there's no one here in the Zoom call and it's probably on YouTube, I don't have access to your comments at this moment, so I can just pick one. But let's look at some code and write some and understand how this works. What I think would make a lot of sense really to look at is this whole incremental static regeneration piece. Like how can we do that with code? And we'll also talk about the trade-offs between client rendered, server rendered, static, and see why we chose to send HTML files from a CDN instead of doing some server rendering magic. To do that, we'll need a minimal repo. So at localhost, I have running just the same docs repo, but without any magic. And we'll slowly add magic to this, okay? So let's recreate a very simple doc site like this. What we want is initially, right? If you're working on any website, docs, marketing, whatever, what you want is somewhere to store your data. And you're probably starting from a place where you don't know who's going to maintain it. Maybe there's going to be content writers, maybe it's going to be coders. You just want something that's relatively easy to maintain it. You kind of want to see a mess or something. And this is actually where Zata makes a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use Zata as my data source because it's easier to type and maintain stuff there. So if I run Zata init, it's going to ask me, do you want to pull from an existing database? I said, no, I'll create a new database. I'll call it Cityjs. So it created a schema for me. So if I go look at it now, I should have a new folder called Zata with a schema. And a schema really just describes the structure of my database. So I have a list of tables here, teams and users. I don't need either of these, so I'll delete them. I'll create a new table. I'll call it pages. Why not? Pages really don't need any of these columns, right? What they need is, they need a column named content for text, probably. And its type is text.
Tejas.
Yes?
I think it shows a different screen. I can see here like the schema. Wait a second. No, I can, wait a second. Yeah, no, I can see it. Before I wasn't. Okay, that's
cool. Thanks. Right. So I have a table, pages, with a column text, with a column content rather, that's text. But I also need some way to probably identify this via a URL. Like on our doc site, we have, if we go to docs.zata.io, we have, each page has its own little like route here, right? So we need a slug or something. Let's just call it slug. Slug string. Okay. Save. This looks like a schema I'm happy to go with. Maybe we'll just add tags as well, just to be a bit extra. Tags, we'll call it multiple. I don't really know. We'll find out. We'll do Zata deploy to make this database go live. It's like, do you want to create a table pages? Yes, I do. I have a database. It's pretty nuts. We can actually go look at it. If we go to app.zata.io, what we're going to see is my new database called city.js. So Cityjs. So here we go, Cityjs. And if I open it, I see nothing. Like there's the table that I made, pages with these columns. That's exactly what I wanted. But there's no data. This can make developing a bit complicated. So what I can do is run Zata random data. And without even reloading the page, normally I have, here we go, just a bunch of content that I can consume on my doc site. This is pretty cool. So let's start by fetching some content and showing some content, okay? How do we do that? Well, we're using Next.js. Even for our main doc site, we use Next.js. We believe Next.js is actually the best way to build websites in React so far. So if you go to pages and index, this is the default route. So it maps directly here. And if I go to pages/page, for example, I get this, which tells me I have an empty H1. But if I save it, boom, you know? So each file in this pages folder maps to a route here, okay? So what I need to do here is I need to fetch my content from Zata and put it in here. Now, if you know React, the way to do that is, on the client side at least, is with use state. So I'll have content and set content will be empty for now, but in a side effect, I will fetch it from Zata. Let's look at how we can do that. Now, I probably want to get it by slug, and I probably want to use a query param like this, right? Slug equals cityjs or something, or maybe even page. Let's do page equals hello, something like that. So let's look at how we do that. So what I do know is in Zata, I want to filter by slug. So I'll add a filter where slug is, for now, I'll do like Sterling Pigeon, right? Okay, great, I have this. So I can get a code snippet, JavaScript, copy, come here to my effect, paste, and instead of console logging the result, I will set content to result.records. I want the first one because we're filtering and there's really only one dot content. Okay, so now I've set my content in state. And if I render content here, and maybe not in H1, maybe in a div, probably is better, I will show content. Boom. Does it work though? It does work. Fantastic. But this is not my Sterling Pigeon, right? Because Sterling Pigeon starts with asequitier, random data. This starts, oh, maybe it is. Okay, who knows? But just to, oh, it actually is because I pasted the query param. So if we want to use the query param from the URL, we'll do window.location.search. We'll remove that question mark, and we'll parse this whole query string using a node library called query string. We'll just get the slug or page, it's called, right, from the browser. So now, empty by default, but if I do, you know, page equals, let's see, what do we have here? Oh, mi fama. So valued Weevil. Let's try that. Okay, we have oh mi fama. So this is actually getting stuff from Zata. It's fantastic. Now, does it support Markdown? Because logically, you'll want to write your docs in something like Markdown, right? So let's just do this and save. Does it work? Yeah, I don't like that. Thankfully, there's a library called React Markdown that does the job for us on the client side. So I'm just going to wrap this actually in Markdown. Does that work? Look at that. That's fantastic. And since it's Markdown, we can even realistically render some type of image. So let's try this one. I don't know. It's the first Jiffy I found. So if we go here, change our database to maybe have an image. This save changes. Does it work? So this is kind of the starting point of a doc site. Isn't that incredible? The only drawback here is we're fetching this on the client side. That can be a huge problem. That can be a problem because if you notice when I load the page, there's initially like this empty state, right? And that's not so ideal. In fact, here, if your internet connection is a bit slow, like we can set timeout to simulate a slow connection. Let's do that. And we'll say like this request maybe takes like 1 second even, right? Then what's going to happen is, look at this. Look at that. Or if your connection's a bit slower, let's say 3 seconds. This is what your users are going to see first. And eventually when your network captures, that's horrible. That's the stuff that makes developers leave your doc side. We want to avoid this. So to avoid this, we do something called server-side rendering. With Next.js, how you do that is you export a function called get server-side props. Get server-side props. And it's an async function. And what it does is it returns props, literally. That's what it does. And so what we're doing is we're kind of inverting control here. Instead of the state belonging to the client-side component, the state will be on the server side, and the component on the client side will receive it through props, okay? So we're going to copy this entire thing. Literally, let's just copy this entire side effect here and put it on the server side. So get away, right? And we'll do this here. Literally the same thing. Just instead of set content, we should assign content, okay? So let's just say const content is await fetch, and instead of this, we'll just return the content just like that. That's good. We now, of course, need to give props to this component. So we'll just send one prop that's a string. Say it's a function component with these props. So we'll have autocompletion here. We can remove the state. Bam, bam, bam. Very nice. And then we'll, of course, pass content through props as well. In fact, did you notice that this didn't give me an error because I didn't tell it which props? So now, if I don't have content, it's going to give me trouble. So I'll say content. This looks good, except we're accessing window, and this happens on the server. The server has no window. What the server does have is query. So we'll just change this to query. This is query string, okay? There. So we just moved stuff around. We're now on the server side. If we reload, there is no initial flash. Look at that. That's stunning. That is beautiful. That is fantastic. So it's excellent. The only thing now is we're still doing work on the server, right? So the server is still calling out to Zata on every load. So every time I do this, the server is like, hey, Zata, do you have new stuff? Hey, and this is putting load on our server for one thing, so you might get rate limited. But two, it's going to be like, if for whatever reason we're slow, you're going to be slow. Our doc site's going to be slow because there's a network dependency there. And also we're bound by the memory, the CPU of the server. If the server is slow, this will be slow. And we can again simulate that by, set timeout, and we'll assign. We'll just say let content in this case. Was that even going to work? No, because we return. Yeah, this becomes really complicated even to simulate. You get the idea though. Oh, actually, we can maybe. Then, yeah, we can do that. So we can return a new promise who resolves with a delay. So we'll set a timeout to resolve with this, right? And we'll do that after 3,000 milliseconds. Okay, so now we're simulating a really slow server. I may have messed up my brackets here. There. Maybe a bit overkill, but we can simulate what happens when your server is really slow. This. Did you see that? Look. In fact, let's go from a blank page. Watch this. That's nasty. I don't want to wait that long. Okay, so this isn't ideal either. Why are you red? Content is incomplete. Okay, it thinks it's unknown, whatever, it's fine. So not ideal as well. How can we do better? And this is where static comes in. In case you haven't noticed, static rendering is the fastest way to serve data. You may think, why? Well, because there is no server work to be done. There is no fetching on the server. There is no rendering that fetch data into a string on the server. No server work. Also, no client work. Literally, your client makes a request, some cache somewhere says, oh, I have a text file, boom, download a text file, done, right? Static is fast because there is no CPU or network bind. It's just boom, just instant. You just get text, okay? So how can we then do this with static? One drawback is with static, we cannot use query params because it's static. You can't read this. I mean, you can on the client side, but if you're getting a HTML file, you'd usually use that through a file, like through a literal file. So what we need to do is for every row here in our database, database, we need to generate one static HTML file, okay? How can we do that? Thankfully, Next.js does this for us. Instead of get server-side props, we'll call it get static props. Okay, get static props. We don't have query, but we do have params. And you might be thinking, well, what is params? And this is where it gets a bit interesting. Because we need to generate one file per row in our database, we need this to be dynamic. We can't do /page ? The page itself needs to be the file name, the slug, okay? So this needs to become a variable, and we'll do it like that. When it's a variable, we need to tell it what values it can expect. What paths do we generate? Do that by export const get static paths. Yes, it's another export and so on, but this is also an async function that, watch this. It expects a prop fallback. That is, in case you can't find the path, do we show a 404 or do we fetch something on demand? Let's fetch something on demand. So we'll block, we'll check and fetch, and if we fail, we fail. And then the paths themselves, what are they supposed to be? They're supposed to be every slug here, basically. So we'll use this get code snippet again, but careful, look, there's a little cautionary note here. This is a temporary access token that's probably expired by now, okay? We need a longer lived one. So we need an API key, and there's a link to the docs here. So I know how to do that. We go to settings, we add a key, call it docs, save. Now I have a long life token. I can use this to interact with the API however I want. So I'll change that out here. By the way, one note, don't commit this in your Git, but store it in an environment variable and reference it like this. It's safer, okay? Also, by the way, fetching on the server side or at build time statically is safer than fetching on the client side because you don't leak your token to a browser's dev tools, okay? That's very important. So we have the token there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fetch as well. I'm just gonna copy this fetch actually to get static paths as well. So we'll go here. And what I'm going to do is remove the whole body from this instance because I don't really want to filter or sort. Okay, so now I'm getting everything, and I don't want.
Tejas, you know what the people telling me is that they cannot see they can only see your ID, but they cannot see the page that you are loading the content.
Sorry, say that again.
They cannot see. I think I don't know if you have a browser that you are loading what you are querying from the fetch.
Yeah, I am.
But it's not showing on the window because it's getting cut somehow.
Okay. Do people see my my entire screen or no?
No, we can only see your ID.
Okay, let's fix that. You. How about now?
Yes, I can see the. Can you split the page into two half? One half is the.
Yeah, I know. I'm changing like this. Is that cool?
No. The do half of the window. Put it on the other window. You have
something like this?
like that. Yeah.
Perfect.
And make the code a bit smaller.
Excellent.
And let's do a bit. Sorry, I was always thinking the same thing. That's why I cut you in before. So maybe comment out some of the code and we have time, so don't worry.
Okay, great, no problem. So anyway, so what we've done is we're trying to get static paths, right? So this is now dynamic. So when I was showing it on the browser, you didn't see anything. Okay, well, trust me, it worked. So what we're doing now is we're generating one HTML page per row of our database, right? Per this. Hopefully you see that now. Great. So what we're doing is we're fetching everything. And when we get the results, we're actually mapping over them to just get the slug over here. So s.slug. Okay. And now we have an array of slugs. So we'll assign this to something. It's actually content. That's fine. So we'll content.map. And we'll map these to static HTML file names, okay? So we have a slug, and we'll add an object here, params. Page is the name of our param here, page, and the param is just the slug, just like that, okay? So what we're doing here now, if we go to / let's try resolved frog from our database, we have a static HTML file. We changed value to Weevil to be a markdown document, right? So if we do that, just like that, look at that. It's fantastic. This is now a static HTML file. It's not server rendered. It's not client rendered. It's just a static file. This is valued space weevil.html effectively. So that's really helpful. We have one last thing to do, and that is populate a sidebar. We actually have a sidebar. Let's maybe put something here to know that we have a sidebar. Great, we have a sidebar. So what we're doing is, let's add the list of paths to the sidebar as well. For that, we need to fetch this stuff even in getStaticProps, because with Next, what you can do is you take your props, your array of props, and you can pass them to a page that contains all the other pages. So next_app is the parent of every page you see, and it has access to that page's props. So when I call getStaticProps from here, the parent also has access to those props, and this renders the sidebar. Okay, so what I can do is I can say sidebar items are sidebar page props dot sidebar. We can say, okay, of course that's red, it's not defined. We can add it, so we'll say items are an array of string, and then what we can do is we can render a little list whose items are. Let's get the items here. All right, items are items dot map. And we need a onClick, of course, when you click on something. We need a label I. That looks good. Of course, that's intentional because we haven't actually fetched this, right? So we need a list of every slug. We actually have a list of every slug in getStaticPaths. You can reuse another function for this. I'm choosing to copy paste because I'm lazy. It's all good. So this is, let's say, slug request options, just to be a bit, we'll say slugs. Okay, and we'll pass through props. Sidebar items is slugs. And again, it's just an array of slugs. We'll add that to our props here as well. Boom. And now everything's green, everything follows. If we reload, what do we have? Another error. So items may or may not be defined as well. So let's quickly nullish coalesce this. And now we have nothing. Why do we have? Let's quickly investigate. So slug request options are here. We're fetching data from Zata. We get results.records.map. We get sidebar items. We're passing the wrong name of the prop, right? We want page props, sidebar items, not .sidebar. If we save, we reload, boom, we have a whole navigation. I click here, I go to nothing happens. I need to add that. So we'll use the router as well. So we'll say const push, and we'll use the router, okay? And on click, we just push /i/slug. So now we have a fully navigable thing powered by Zata as our documentation source. So if we go to legible, whatever, what is that, Quagga, electric baboon, these are actually records in Zata. And of course, our good friend, the valued Weevil, who is a markdown document. We have this, it works. That's static generation. And effectively what we're getting is just a bunch of HTML files. It's really powerful because it's just text, but there presents one final problem that we'll solve, and then we'll end the talk there. But this so far looks good. I'm going to actually deploy this. Let's deploy it to Vercel. Yes. And it's going to ask me like who I am and so on. That's me. Do I want to? Yeah, sure. So now I'll deploy this. And while it's deploying, it's really interesting to inspect these build logs, because what's going to happen is it's going to, at build time, it's going to call out to Zata. It's going to get these records, and it's going to one by one create HTML files for them. And it does all of this in less than a minute. It's pretty nuts. We can follow along here. I think it's going to do npm install, which will give us a good amount of time to recap what we saw or maybe didn't see. So what we've done is we've created a database somewhere to put our data that will hold our documentation. It'll hold our documentation, and it'll allow anybody to edit it. Like content people can come here and say, hey, I want to just add a heading. They can write markdown, and they can add tags even. They can add tags and stuff, save changes, and it's just there, so they can manage it, and our site is built from it. We fetched on the client side, and we saw how it can be slow in case of a slow network. We fetched on the server side, same thing. It can be slow in case of a slow server network. So we decided, let's do HTML files to be quick, because as we saw in our initial docs.zata website, or maybe we didn't see, it's just exceptionally fast when profiled in Lighthouse. It just goes nuts. I don't know if you saw this before, because apparently I was only sharing my IDE, but when we put it through its paces, it's quite impressive, right? And that's because it's just a static text file. There is no client rendering. There is no server rendering, okay? So now if we look at the build logs, generating static pages, 0 out of 28. Isn't that impressive? So it generated, as you can see, 1 static page for each path. And if we visit this, let's take a look. What do we have? We have hello and nothing more. So let's actually go to a route. What was our favorite? Valued Weevil. Let's go here. And we should have a sidebar and everything. There we go. And look how fast. That's incredible. Because again, there's really no fetching happening. All of this is static. It's just text. The drawback here is because it's just text, how does it rebuild? You know what I mean? Like if some content person shows up and is like, hey, I want to change hello to shalom, right? What's going to happen? Is that going to rebuild? How do I rebuild? Do I actually have to like deploy every time? Gosh, that's not an ideal workflow. How do I? And this is where we come to the final piece of the puzzle. It's called ISR, or incremental static regeneration. It's bonkers, this stuff. What it is in your get static props function, right? If you return alongside props, if you return a little flag called revalidate, set it to true, save. Let's redeploy this. What this is going to do is pretty nuts. Now, what I'm doing, by the way, is I'm redeploying this website. So you will see there's a new build here. Okay, I'm redeploying. And of course, if I redeploy, it's going to, at build time, call out to Zata. It's going to get Shalom, and the new website will have Shalom. That's to be expected. So the new deployment that happens in about 30 seconds is going to have the latest state. What we're concerned about here is the content changing when the database changes without having to redeploy. Okay, and that's what revalidate true does. And we'll look at that in just a second, as soon as it deploys. So as we're here, we're generating static stuff again. We're just about done. I give it maybe 5 seconds more. And when it's done, there we go. So we can visit it and go to our, what was that? Valued Weevil. And what we'll see is, again, we should see Shalom here. By the way, okay, never mind. So Shalom, good. But now, maybe I want to change this. Shalom Cityjs. Okay, I saved it in Zata. Should I redeploy? With incremental static regeneration, no. If I reload the page, I see Shalom again. This is expected. But what's happening now is when I refresh the page, it's actually firing another request in the background to rebuild this specific page. That's pretty bonkers. So what's happening is when someone sends a request, then it recalculates the page, and the next request, without having to redeploy, has the latest state. So if I reload this now, I should see Shalom Cityjs, and it just builds in the background. So okay, I guess not. Vercel is having some issues today, so I didn't know if this would work. It will take some time though. In fact, we can look at just the logs to make sure everything's fine. So far, everything's okay. But this is exactly incremental static regeneration. So when you reload, it builds in the background, and you get the latest state. So we'll change this to Shalom Cityjs2. Reload, there we go. So we have Shalom Cityjs. I didn't redeploy, it just built in the background. As I said, Vercel is experiencing some issues with this today, but you can rest assured it will build in the background without having to redeploy. What triggers the rebuild in the background is a single hit, a single person coming to your website, right? It's effectively as if somebody comes to your website, clicks the redeploy button. It's pretty cool. So it moves the burden of deployment onto the visitor instead of onto your engineers. Again, Let's reload that. I changed it to Shalom Cityjs 2, and I get a stale result. I think it's still building in the background. Okay, there we go. So again, I didn't redeploy, right? It just happened in the background, and I get the latest one. Vercel uses something called stale while revalidate to do this. It serves you a stale result, which may be a bit older, as we've seen, but it serves you that stale result while building the new one in the background. So again, if I reload, I'll see a stale result until the new one is ready. And then I will see, whenever it rebuilds, I will see Shalom Cityjs 3. There we go. So it just rebuilds in the background, serves the latest one, right? And so this way, we're able to serve static HTML text, but also in a dynamic way. We get the best of both worlds. We get, like, you serve text files from the CDN edge, but you serve it as well in a dynamic way, such that when the underlying content changes, the site changes, with zero client work, zero server work as well. And that at Zata is how we're able to get what we consider really world-class developer experience on our docs. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to talk about the code generation piece or the feedback piece, although we'll do that probably in another talk. But that's it for now. I'm curious to know what questions you have, and I want to thank you so much for your time.